Erin, can I ask you to close the door for me? Guys can give me just 1 second. I've had a small technical glitch that I am figuring out. Excellent. I am good to go. As stated, this is the September meeting of the Continuing Advisory Committee for Special Education. My name is Jen Stratton and I am your chair. We are excited to welcome a new member to our committee. I'd like to put her on the spot very briefly, just to introduce herself. Claudia, please introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your background.
Hello, everyone. My name is Claudia Cavazos. I have been an educator for over 20 years. My experience is both in public school and in private school. Currently, I am the principal at St. Christopher Catholic School, and I have been in Houston, Texas, my entire teaching career, and that is where I'm from. So I said a little bit about myself.
We are glad to have you here and thankful for your service to the state and to our committee.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Briefly, because we do have a fairly full agenda today, I'd like to invite any members of the public who wish to speak to sign in through the comments to notify TEA of your desire to speak to this committee. I'd also like to remind any members of the public that outside of the public comment period, members of the committee or members of the public are not permitted to address the committee business. With that, as you can see, we have our member duties listed at the top of our agenda. Thank you, Stephanie, for always including those. And I'd like to go ahead now and kick off the meeting with updates from TEA. Dr. Porter, are you with us?
I am. Good morning. I turned my video on reluctantly because I am actually representing TEA at a conference in National Association for State Directors for Special Education conference. And we had to check out of our rooms this morning. And so I don't have a quiet place other than the car in the parking garage. So that's where I am. Apologies for that. And if there becomes a problem with my audio, I'll go ahead and shut my camera off. But I wanted to be sure to turn it on to tell you all good morning and say hi. If it starts to break up, somebody let me know, and I'll go ahead and turn the video off. That usually helps. Is my audio coming through?
You're doing great.
Great. We're also on cell network because Wi-Fi doesn't reach the garage. So there's a lot of things could go wrong. We'll see what happens. Couple of quick updates. I know that y'all wanted first and foremost to hear about the Digital Curriculum Accessibility Committee report, and that is unfortunately still in the same place it was last time we spoke. It's in senior review at TEA, and I have several times advocated for the importance of that document and the need to get it released, especially in time for folks to inform some policy decisions going into session, and that is I've been informed that of course they hear that and they understand the importance of it, but senior leadership is prioritizing work around school safety since May. So we'll continue to work on that, and I'll continue to push to get something out for that. But in addition to that, we have an update on OSEP. So of course, OSEP has been here at this conference where I am today, and so my updates are pretty recent. Haven't even had a chance to share much of them with my staff. By and large, OSEP hasn't had anything new to say related to our corrective action for quite some time. I know that they are waiting for us to get them some information related to the implementation of the Dyslexia Handbook, and so we had a requirement that all districts in the state, this is related to the corrective action, all districts in the state train their staff, at least one staff member who's in a good place to disseminate that information but on the new handbook by the end of August. And we're still working with, we probably, out of the 1,227 LEAs that we have in the state, there are about less than 50, about 48 that we still don't have assurances from that they've done that training. And so we're working individually with those districts to either make sure that they get the assurance done or that they get the training done, whichever they need to do. We've offered that training virtually for free of charge across the state several times over the summer, and all of the ESCs are also offering it. And so we're just working with a few stragglers to get that done. OSEP has indicated to us that that's probably the last thing on the list. So once we get that information to them, we're hopeful that we'll have some good news with the corrective action coming soon. One of the things that OSEP has informed us of, or talked to us a little bit about here at this conference, is related to some guidance that came out from OSEP over the summer, late in the summer, related to discipline. And many of us, state directors included across at the conference and just in general, had questions related to that guidance, because I don't know if y'all have seen it, but it doesn't seem to give any new information. It just, whenever we have guidance come out like that from OSEP, we're expecting it to be something new and something different, and we just didn't see that. And so having a chance to have candid conversations with OSEP about it and asking them sort of what was the purpose of the guidance and what was the direction that they wanted states to take. It was really, and in this guidance, it does mention this, but it's not new information, but really they wanted to give states some sort of support or backup when it comes to talking to districts about informal removals. And I know some of the stakeholders in this call, that's going to be something important to them as well, because we've heard that from stakeholders over and over again, of the importance of making sure districts understand that suspending a child at 10 o'clock in the morning is still suspension, even though you've already taken attendance for the day. They need to start doing things like that and reconsider their practice around those informal removals for kiddos. We also have already proactively mentioned that in our recent technical assistance guide on behavior, and thanks to some feedback holders as well, information to that in that technical assistance guide. So those are the big OSEP updates. The Special Education Finance Commission work has been ongoing all summer. They aren't likely to have another meeting. We just, I think a week and a half ago, met. They aren't likely to have another meeting until after the election. They actually requested that during the last meeting. One of the things that they have us working on are some modeling around a model that they're interested in for funding special education that is related to sort of tiered service intensity levels. And so they gave us some marching orders on that, and we're putting some things together for them, for that commission to consider. It would basically sort children by services, not by where they receive the services. They would be sorted by what types of services and how many services they receive, and then that would drive weighted funding. In addition to the weighted funding, they have us looking at some sort of ancillary groups. For instance, that you would, students with specific learning disability in fill in the blank X, Y, or Z that may be receiving specially designed instruction in an inclusive environment for one or two subject areas may also be receiving, for instance, and that would drive, just that alone would drive the weighted funding based on ADA. But then if they were also receiving speech services or dyslexia therapy or physical therapy, something like that, that would drive sort of a allocation for that child based on enrollment of $1,500 or $2,000 or whatever it is that the commission lands on. But it would sort of be on top of that weighted funding that would also receive some funding specific to help support the LEA and the implementation of those ancillary instructional or.
I think we lost him. Yep, we lost. There he is.
Am I back?
Yes.
I can hear you.
All right. I am gonna shut up.
Justin, if you turn your camera off, that may help. Thank you so much.
And Justin, when this is Shemik Allen, when you get a second, I want to go back to what you were talking about after you get done about the policy that just came out in July.
Sure,
on the discipline?
sure.
Okay.
I'm pretty much finished with the Special Education Funding Commission. They, the last area I was talking about, sort of those ancillary funding groups, would be around assistive technology, or then also situations where students have dedicated staff. One of the things that LEAs have brought up consistently is the expense involved in a full-time paraprofessional or even a part-time dedicated paraprofessional for that child, or a nurse, and how expensive that can be. And so that's also contemplated in what the Funding Commission has asked us to put together. They're looking at a few other sort of reimbursement type things. For instance, reimbursing LEAs a sort of a flat rate for FIEs. If so, however many FIEs they do in a year, we collect that information through the SPP 11 collection. They could then they would then receive funding based on how many FIEs they conducted during the year. And they're also looking at increasing the transportation allotment. So all of those things are on the table, and who knows what else they'll bring back in November as far as recommendations. But they have asked us specifically on the things I've mentioned to pull some information together and get some language going for them to drop into their report. So that's all I had about the Funding Commission. Unless there's questions about that, I can jump back to the discipline guidance question.
Well, Justin, you know that you're talking about the one that came out in July of 2022, just here recently.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I've read through it, you know, I'm not gonna say thoroughly, but more than briefly. And you saying that you didn't see any changes, and you were asking why they put the guidance out. What kind of changes were you looking for at first? What kind of changes were you looking for? And what do you feel is the same that hasn't already been given out as a guidance before?
So I think it's, we weren't necessarily anticipating any changes. It's just usually when they put a letter like that, it's either clarifying previous guidance or giving some new guidance. And it didn't really do either of those two things. It doubled down on a lot of stuff. So I think that was really their intention of emphasizing issues around significant disproportionality in discipline, and then also emphasizing that states need to have policies in place to prevent those informal removals of children that sort of stay off the books. And that they just, and that was sort of our assumption when we read it, and we sort of came together as a policy group trying to see if there was anything in our policies that needed to be adjusted based on that. And other states that were in the same boat. When I was here talking to other states, they were all sort of had the same question of is there something here that has policy implications for a state? Probably not. But more of how we craft our guidance and how we emphasize things for our districts is really where they're going, around significant disproportionality and around those informal removals.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Any other questions about any of that?
I don't see anything in chat, Justin.
All righty. Well,
Thank
one
you,
thing I
Dr.
would like
Porter.
to, I would like to mention before I go that we have hired and onboarded a new senior director for special education programs and policy. And she actually started this week on Monday. She's not here with me at conference. Kristen McGuire is going to fill that role for us. And I will, she couldn't be here today to meet y'all. She's still doing onboarding activities at TEA and was in a mandatory meeting related to that. But next time I'll be sure to have her here. And y'all quite a bit in the future. I think she's going to be over some responsibility of my plate going to become hers, but she will report to me in my chain of command, and so I'll still be definitely in the loop. And Kristen will also be a great resource for y'all. So that name may sound familiar. Kristen comes to us from TCASE, the Texas Council for Administrators of Special Education. She was their director of governmental relations for the last 5 or 6 years, and so she has a strong policy background, but also has a really solid instructional background. And I think she's going to be definitely value added to the team. So we're excited to bring her on board. That's it.
Thank you, Dr. Porter. We look forward to your next report when we meet again in October.
Thanks.
Aaron, in answer to your question in the chat, Kristen McGuire. With that, I'd like to call upon Jacob Klett for his report.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'm Jacob Klett. I'm the Director of Special Education Strategic Integration at TEA, and I have a colleague on as well who's going to be speaking with the group as well. Dana, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Good morning. Thank you for having us this morning. My name is Dana Garza. As Jacob said, I am a member of the Special Education Strategic Integration team. Looking forward to visiting with you all for a few minutes this morning.
Thanks, Dana. I'm going to drop my contact info in the chat there in case anybody has questions after and would like to reach out. Just a little bit about the work we do, and then we're going to jump into really focusing on inclusion in Texas. I know that the committee had some questions regarding what TEA and the state was doing around inclusive practices for students with disabilities. So really excited to share some work that we've been engaged in over the last year and a half in particular that we're really excited about. But before we jump into that, what we do as a strategic integration team here at TEA is really work with colleagues cross-functionally within the agency to ensure that considerations for students with disabilities are part of our entire ecosystem of statewide support. So we do a lot of work with our colleagues in curriculum and instruction and school programs and educator supports to ensure that we're really thinking holistically about how we can meet the needs of all learners through our efforts as an agency to support local districts and charter schools. And so the inclusion in Texas work is certainly a critical part of that portfolio. And we've been able to leverage this work to support some pretty exciting opportunities for kids over the last couple of years. So with that, we can jump in. So the agenda for this morning will be just touching briefly on specially designed instruction requirements and inclusion. I know that was one of the questions that came up, I think, in your July meeting. We'll highlight some instructional resources that are currently available to educators to support students with disabilities. There were also some specific questions around assistive technology and teacher certification and preparation. We'll touch on those. And then we'll spend some time toward the end talking about a project we're very excited about, which is the system-wide inclusion framework for districts. Before we jump into content, I know first and foremost, one of the questions was what exactly is required for general education teachers when it comes to requirements for meeting the needs of students with disabilities. There are some requirements that we'll touch on related to teacher preparation in just a little bit that came out of House Bill 159 in the 87th legislative session. The bulk of what we're going to be touching on today with the inclusionary practices work is not required under any state statute. There are, of course, federal requirements related to least restrictive environment and the education of students with disabilities. That is the driving catalyst for this work, and we'll touch on that as well. So just kind of start out, what is it that we're talking about when we say inclusion? So shared here on the screen, we have identified a definition through about 3.5 years of stakeholder engagement with folks around the state. And at the core of this work, we see inclusion as a set of practices, actions, responsibilities, and learning environments that a school community provides to foster equitable access for students with disabilities who receive special education services. This is very intentional and leads to high quality education engagement, both academically and non-academically for all students. And it's rooted in a belief that specially designed learning is based on individual student strengths, needs, and abilities. We often are asked, how do you do this? How do you do inclusion and who's responsible for doing it? And the answer to that question really is centered around this idea of specially designed instruction, or SDI, that we have instruction that's tailored to a particular student, that's driven through their individualized education program, their IEP, and their goals. It's accounting for that student's disability, provides modifications or adaptations to content as needed, and ensures that they have appropriate access to general education curriculum through the least restrictive environment. Most importantly, as we've been engaging in this work, SDI is driven through the IEP and might be implemented by a general educator, by a special educator, by a combination of both. It really is a collaborative effort. And actually, before we go on, there's one other thing that I did want to touch on. If y'all have questions as we go, please feel free to drop them in the chat. As time allows, we'll try to answer those today. If not, then we'll collect those questions and we can certainly follow up with folks as needed, whether through Stephanie or if folks have really specific questions, happy to connect with you outside of the space and try to answer those as well. Dana, we can go to the next slide, please. So in thinking about this work, I just want to ground this in the evolution of the idea of inclusion. So the visual that you're seeing here actually comes from Shelley Moore. Some folks here might be familiar with Shelley Moore's work. She's an author and influencer who writes and speaks about the importance of inclusion in schools. There's a video linked here. We're not going to show the video for purposes of time today, but essentially we understand that the focus on inclusionary practices has evolved along a continuum where at one point in time, our students with disabilities were fully excluded from access. And over time, that's really looked more like separate spaces, and then sort of this idea of integration of separate spaces within shared spaces and really moving toward a fully inclusive model where students with disabilities are a critical member of the community of learners alongside their non-disabled peers. In terms of where we are as a state, we believe as an agency that most local education agencies, districts, and charters in Texas generally have practices that fall somewhere between the integration and inclusion visual here on the continuum. And go to the next slide. As was noted in the questions that we received, we are seeing higher rates of students spending more and more time in the general education setting, both nationwide and here in our state. And actually, it's important to highlight that in Texas, we actually are educating our students with disabilities in general education environments at higher than the national rate, and that's been consistent over the last couple of years that we have data 2018, 19, and 20. So that leads to, what does that mean? That we have students with disabilities who are spending more and more time in general education environments. This is national data. Students with disabilities are spending more time in general education, but we also know that teachers are not necessarily feeling prepared to meet the needs of students with disabilities. As noted, on a national level, most students who are receiving special education services spend at least 80% of their academic day in a general education setting. And this data comes from the citation there at the bottom. This is from the National Center for Learning Disabilities, reported in 2019. In that same report, it was noted that teachers, general education teachers, generally feel unprepared to meet the needs of the 1 in 5 students with disabilities who are students in their classroom. And then when looking at national data, this comes from NAEP, the data that was reported through NAEP in 2017. So looking at 4th grade performance and 8th grade performance, students with disabilities were generally performing below the basic 4th grade reading level. And they're falling behind in math as well. Go to the next slide. So thinking about how we then, what that looks like for our state, what are our educators here in Texas telling us? We actually completed a survey as part of our special education monitoring pilot back in the spring of 2019, just before the pandemic. It's approximately 9 months or so before school closures happened. And we asked a variety of stakeholders in our districts and charters who participated in the pilot. What are the areas of support that you feel you need, and where are you seeing your greatest struggles with implementation of special education programs and services? This survey was completed by 1,352 respondents, and over half of those respondents were Texas general education teachers. As you can see, some critical pieces that really surfaced for our team through this data, LRE and placement and access to general curriculum came up as the 2nd and 3rd, respectively, very close to a tie there, as areas where our educators indicate they need support. Related to implementation, the greatest area of need identified was providing individualized supports. And so our data as a state does seem to reflect and sort of be in line with the data that the National Center for Learning Disabilities collected at a nationwide level. Our Texas educators, even before the pandemic, were telling us we want to support all learners, and we're just not always sure what that looks like. And sometimes we have some struggles and we're looking for some support. You can go to the next slide. One of the questions we received was around statutory requirements for inclusion. And one thing that's really important to note at a federal level, the IDEA does require that each student with a disability be provided with specially designed instruction at no cost to their parent to meet the unique needs of the child who has a qualifying disability. And that means a couple of things. That means that this instruction needs to address that child's unique needs and ensure that that child has access to general curriculum so that the student can meet educational standards that apply to all children. So to do that, we might adapt content, methodology, or delivery of instruction. So our work is really centered around how we can support districts in doing this, meeting these unique needs of students, making these adaptations, maintaining levels of rigor that are appropriate for students to make progress, and ensuring that they have access to learning environments that are age and grade appropriate, and access to curriculum that's age and grade appropriate as well. Go to the next slide. I'm not going to go through this in depth, but when we think about SDI, SDI is very specifically developed to meet a child's unique needs. So we want to differentiate that from potential research-based interventions that might be provided through a multi-tiered system of supports or other means in a school. SDI is driven through the ARD committee to ensure access to general education and must be implemented per the student's IEP. It can include accommodations, it can include services. It should align to the student's grade level standards and the TEKS, and again, really focus on how we adapt the content, methodology, or delivery of instruction. It's more than differentiation or high yield instructional strategies that a general educator might otherwise provide to all students in a classroom setting. There is a 2021 updated quick reference guide on SDI that's linked here on the slide. That's a great resource that we've made available to our educators around the state that includes the information on this slide as well as some other information on specially designed instruction as well. We also published several guidance documents to support our educators, and this is done through a grant that we provide to ESC Region 20 in San Antonio, which is the Inclusion in Texas Network. Several things just to highlight generally around SDI, and then we'll kind of drill down on some specific pieces in a minute. We have updated guidelines on co-teaching approaches and implementation, the effective use of paraprofessionals, and then a grading and progress monitoring guide for students with disabilities that's currently in revision. So let's kind of jump to some specific instructional resources and address some questions that we received regarding professional development for educators. Our team has done a substantial amount of work with our colleagues in curriculum instruction school programs over the last 2 years. That really started with the Texas Home Learning Initiative through the pandemic, and then that work has continued post-pandemic as well. That's really centered around the development of high quality instructional materials, which is that acronym here, Hqim. Just add another acronym to the dictionary of the many acronyms that we use in education. But the theory of action here really is that if districts adopt high quality instructional materials and are able to implement those with fidelity through the use of research-based instructional strategies, that can lead to stronger student outcomes. One piece that we've leveraged there is the COVID Recovery Instructional Materials Support Initiative. It's a mouthful. It's often called CRIMSI. And that is an initiative for districts, charters, and schools who were interested in piloting what was called the Texas Home Learning Instructional Materials, and we're now calling Hqim. And through that work, CRIMSI provided direct supports to districts and school leaders, as well as professional learning to educators through coaches, and additional PD training supports, print materials, and even stipends in some cases. Again, this work was optional, but we did have a substantial number of districts who did participate in the initial CRIMSI work. That work is actually ongoing too. This coming school year, or this current school year rather, there will be a third year of CRIMSI, And we'll be continuing to work with our colleagues to make sure that our educators who are working to meet the needs of learners with disabilities are supported, and that the high quality instructional materials are adequately equipped to be differentiated and flexible to meet student needs. What you're seeing right now is sort of our theory of integration around HQIM, high quality instructional materials. So really thinking about, as districts adopt these materials and are working to train up their teachers and educators on the implementation, that we're really considering the interface of research-based instructional materials through the supports with CRIMSI, infusing concepts related to specially designed instruction, and leveraging HQIM, that it's adaptable, flexible, and developed using universal design for learning principles to meet the needs of learners through the course of that adoption and implementation work related to those materials. The objectives of CRIMSI really have been to provide opportunities for districts to pilot these materials and provide feedback back to TEA. Educators and leaders received professional learning and other supports to teachers, instructional coaches, leaders that was intended to support their successful implementation. And ultimately, the goal is to reduce COVID-related learning loss for all students and have a positive impact on student outcomes. The most current year, so 2021, 2022, and then heading into this year, I'll continue planning and implementation support for leaders, continue product-specific professional learning for both teachers and coaches, providing print materials, including any necessary manipulatives or books, and stipends for teachers and coaches for those who are participating. So the infusion of SDI that we mentioned, just kind of want to drill in a little bit on that and show you, just highlight some of the work that we've been able to do in partnership with our colleagues in school programs. So we leveraged our grant with ESC 20 to develop accommodation companion guides for all of the HQIM curricular materials, as well as specially designed instruction field users guides that are available for each of those materials as well. The bulleted list of curricular materials all the way over on the right, so Odell Amplify, K5, K8, PhD Science, Carnegie Math, and Eureka Math, all have an accommodation companion guide and an SDI field user guide. The accommodation companion guides are available in both English and Spanish. The SDI field user guides currently are available only in English. These materials include case studies that showcase how the materials can be flexibly differentiated to meet the needs that are outlined in a student's IEP. They provide guidance on co-teaching approaches that could be utilized to implement high-quality instructional materials, as well as guidance for differentiating the materials to meet learners' needs who might require certain accommodations or even modifications in order to access the curriculum. Each case study material, each SDI guide also includes a side-by-side example. So just looking at the middle there, of a standard unit from that particular curricular product. And through that example shows how SDI can be embedded for a particular sample student to really help bring it to life for the users of these materials. And then, as noted, it also includes considerations for teachers around collaboration, curricular development, and what it looks like to really implement these materials in an inclusive environment for students. With that, Dana, I'm going to pass it over to you, and we'll shift gears a little bit and talk about assistive technology.
Thanks, Jacob. Well, I noticed that from the last session that you had, there were several questions around assistive technology. Bear with me, we will call it AT at times, just because, like Jacob said, what is another acronym in our world of education? Want to start with some legal references around what is required for assistive technology. There are federal, state, and then commissioner's rule regarding what is required of assistive technology for students. Also wanted to take a moment this morning to really norm with this group on what assistive technology is and how it is a big piece of a student's individualized education program. What AT really does is it enables our students with disabilities to access the curriculum, and it really increases their independence and participation, not only in their education, but also in their life activities if necessary. One thing that we think about with assistive technology is we probably think of the AT that we have readily available. Like I've got my cell phone here. I brought my little boy's iPad, because these are things that we often think about when we're talking assistive technology. We think about high-tech options, and we live in a very technology centered world, but it's important to note when you're thinking about assistive technology that it also can consider things that we consider low tech. And so this is just a pencil grip. So a pencil grip could be part of a student's assistive technology if necessary. So please remember as we move through this that AT is any item, piece of equipment, or product system that is used to like increase or maintain that student's ability to function. And also wanted to point out for this group that it does not include a medical device or anything that is surgically implanted. Those things are not considered AT devices. Sometimes the use of a assistant or a paraprofessional to be a scribe for a student can be confused with assistive technology, but assistive technology is not a person. It's really important to norm around that it is a device or an item or material or equipment. Wanted to take a few moments to update this group and make you aware of several pieces of guidance that the agency has. We, as Jacob said earlier, work closely with ESC 20 and San Antonio. They are our grantee for the Inclusion in Texas work. And a lot of the work that we do around assistive technology is in partnership with ESC 20. The guide on the left has recently been updated. It is the 4-step assistive technology consideration model. And you see those boots on there, and it is a heavy Texas reference to 2-step dancing, but it is a 4-step process for our committee members to use in the development, review, and revision of a student's IEP. So what the ARC committee can do is they can use this as a model so that they're ensuring that they're consistently and equitably considering the assistive technology that is appropriate for students with disabilities. This guide also helps staff incorporate best practices around assistive technology and really looking at research-based approaches for how to consider what is best and individualized for that student. Also, want to note that I keep going back to high-tech and low-tech language. This guide does not just center on high-tech. It also looks at the low-tech options for assistive technology for students as they begin to acquire and practice a specific set of skills. Those same type practices are also included in the guide that you see on your right. This is a relatively new guide that was recently published over, I believe, this summer. And it is identifying the right tool as far as assistive technology goes when working with struggling readers. We realize that as students are learning to read, and students with disabilities who are learning to read have specific needs to access the low and high tech technology supports. And what this guide does is it partners with and provides options for the ARC committee members to make the most appropriate choices on the types of low and high tech available to help equip the students who are struggling to learn how to read. Jacob, I see we have a chat. Will you handle that for me, please?
Yes, it was actually just me. I've dropped the
okay.
link to the Inclusion in Texas site into the chat so folks have it.
Okay, great, thanks. I also want to point out another resource that you don't see on your screen here. Texas has what we call an assistive technology loan library. There are times that some forms of assistive technology can be very costly for a district, and it may not be the most appropriate support, but districts need to have the ability to borrow some of these assistive technology tools to determine whether or not a student may benefit from the use of those. And Each service center around the state has an assistive technology representative at their service center, and they can, a school district or even a parent can reach out to that AT representative for additional information on how to have access to the assistive technology loan library and borrow some tools before a district purchases it to determine whether or not that is the AT that best meets that student's need. One question that came up also was around the options for professional development for staff and even parents across the state. Through a partnership with the Inclusion in Texas Network and the Texas Education Agency, we've been able to leverage professional development through the Assistive Technology Industry Association. I call it ATIA. And what ATIA does is it provides access through the use of a code for anyone to be able to use the different types of professional development to better equip themselves to implement AT to benefit the student. ATIA has worked closely with the Texas Education Agency through the Inclusion in Texas Network to develop pathways. So there are different pathways that contain several courses that are available for parents, the special educator, the general educator, and related service providers to increase their knowledge around the different types of assistive technology and how they can benefit the students. Also wanted to show you some of the specific courses and sessions that are available through this partnership with ATIA. We saw over the last school year a 39% increase in the number of people in Texas accessing ATIA courses to help improve the use of their assistive technology with students. Some of the things that you see listed on your screen there are the most accessed sessions. And you'll notice that we have the first one, which is implementing a coaching model for families and educators, which equips educators to be able to work with parents on how to have a partnership with the school, the student, and the parent in the use of the assistive technology. You'll see some other of the specific courses or sessions that were accessed throughout the state over the last year, and would also like to know that all 20 service centers, all 20 regions had people accessing the different sessions and pathways within the ATIA subscription. Going to pause there around the information available this morning on assistive technology. Do hope that you're able to take away some of the different resources that we have available to stakeholders in the state of Texas. Want to make sure that you had access to the requirements at the federal, state, and commissioner level, and also that you were aware of the different professional development opportunities to support educators and parents across the state when it comes to assistive technology. I'm going to pause there and turn things back over to Jacob to speak a little bit about teacher preparation requirements and address some of the questions that you had.
Hey, Dana, before we moved on, I had a couple questions for you. Now good time.
Yeah, yes, sir. I'm sorry. I couldn't find my mute button.
First question I have is, there's a Texas Technology Access Program that UT runs. Is that the same as, different, interrelated with the lending program you mentioned at the ESCs?
Aaron, can you drop the name that you just said, please, into the chat so that I can follow up on that for you?
Sure. And then the second question I have is, these access sessions, so these are trainings related to specific assistive technologies that are used in the classrooms, or are these like recorded webinars? Are they particular format? Are they accessed in a single portal? Are they, where do people find them? How do they know to get them? That sort of thing.
That's a great question. Let me click on the link here. Jacob, will you put this link in the chat for him, please?
Yes, absolutely.
And give me just a second, Aaron. I wasn't prepared. I'm sorry to open that up this morning.
Yeah, the link's in the chat.
Yeah, this link here will take you and give you the actual access code that you can use. Want to make sure I'm still sharing my screen. Did that pop up, Jacob?
Yeah, I'm
Yep.
seeing
Okay.
that.
Great. So this is additional information on how educators can utilize the ATI online course program portal. To answer your first question, Erin, there are different modes of delivery in the different sessions. It could be a recorded webinar, it could be an interactive module. So that's the first thing to note. The next thing to note is these 4 different pathways that are listed here were curated specifically for Texas, so that as you go into the different pathways, you're able to access the sessions in order and complete a pathway in order to establish this objective of the pathway. Again, these are free if you utilize the code that is listed here.
Okay, and so let's say an art committee decides student needs to use a screen reader. Would that student access this to help them understand how to use JAWS or NVDA or VoiceOver, whatever they're choosing, or how are they, the teachers that will be supporting them, the support staff, the parent, the student, how would they access this? Is that something that they're connected with as part of the art process?
This is definitely something that could be discussed during the minutes of the ARD, and this resource be made available to parents. And then at the local district level, they determine how to best use these courses so that the parent, staff, and student are able to appropriately implement the assistive technology that is decided during the ARD committee meeting. Jacob, you have something to add?
The only thing I would add, just going back to Stephanie, thanks for dropping the list of the 20 service centers in the chat there. There is an assistive technology representative at each of those service centers that's well-versed in these materials, as well as equipped to provide coaching and training to teachers as well as families around assistive technology. So in the, outcome of an art committee decision that a certain type of assistive technology is necessary for a student, the district could leverage that ESC representative as well as a resource.
Okay, so the resources are available. I guess then the question would be, is that connecting with a student? I've certainly seen lots of situations where somebody says, hey, I need this assistive technology, or this is the assistive technology you need, and then as if that's like somehow waving a wand that says things will be made better from there.
Yeah, so we certainly would recognize that there's an implementation process, right, around assistive technology. I mean, it's not feasible to simply provide a student with a device and expect them to, somehow magically know how to use that device. So it is certainly possible that local folks who are members of the art committee or within the district might be knowledgeable and be able to provide supports around that. If they do need support, we do have the resources that Dana highlighted here, as well as the resources available through the ESC.
Okay, and these are just, I noticed this is on the ATI website, so this is just about how to use AT, and does ATIA update that material? Is that something that you revisit with them or say, hey, we want this sort of thing?
Dana, do you
Yeah.
want to address that one?
Yes, we have an ongoing partnership with ATIA, and we work very closely with them, and we have the ability to do some creative things like establishing those pathways. That was one of the first things we did with them, was look at the number of courses that they had available and then curate them into 4 different pathways to truly benefit from the robust information that they had posted.
Thank you.
We also have on the Inclusion in Texas website additional professional development opportunities through national organizations, and then literacy and math resources, as well as some different places that you can go to get additional AT resources outside of the Assistive Technology Loan Library. And again, the different representatives at the different service centers that are the AT representatives for their region are very helpful and very involved in this process. They meet quarterly and align on resources, needs of the state, and what are our next steps that we need to have implemented or created as far as guidance goes based around the needs that are coming up in their different regions and at the state level.
And this is Aaron again. I put in chat the link to the Texas Technology Access Program. I believe that is funded through the AT Act. So I don't know a lot more than that. It's just something I've come across before. They've got a lending library. So it just sounded very familiar. I wasn't sure if it was related to what you were talking about with the ESCs.
Well, let me do a little bit of research on that, Aaron, and I'll get some additional information to you through Stephanie.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
This is Joanne Wofford. I have a question as it relates to what we're all seeing in our state, that being the shortage of teachers not coming back. Is there a restriction to who can implement this? Do you kind of foresee our districts changing their onboarding process for substitute teachers to be able to apply this?
Those are really great questions, Joanne. As I'm sure that folks are aware, there is an ongoing teacher vacancy task force that's really looking at how to address the issue around educator shortages. And so Dana is actually a representative on the committee. And I know that these are conversations that are open and active, and appreciate you surfacing that. I think that's something that we can make sure is addressed through that committee and potentially any other avenues that come out of that work as well. I know we're all looking for creative solutions and making sure that we have highly qualified educators in our classrooms to meet the needs of our students, and are, looking at researching different ways to make sure that we can continue to make that happen. Thanks, Stephanie. And someone from the task force is on the agenda later today as well.
Thank you.
I want to thank you all this morning for your questions and your engagement as we talked about assistive technology. It was lovely to visit with you.
Thanks, Dana. I'm going to touch now briefly about some teacher preparation requirements, and I'm also going to drop in the chat if folks do have some follow-up questions regarding this information in particular. The best person to contact is my colleague here at the agency, whose name is Kelly Torrey. She works in the Division of Educator Standards and Testing. Just dropped her email there. Did invite her to speak this morning as part of this presentation. Unfortunately, she's presenting at a conference this morning and wasn't able to attend. So I'm going to speak briefly on these items. And we do a fair amount of engagement with Kelly and her team as well. One of the questions that we received was around the plan for ensuring general education teachers are better prepared to teach kids with disabilities. And one thing to highlight here is the passage of House Bill 159 in the 87th legislative session. This bill went into effect September 1st of 2021. And HB 159 addressed the need for teachers to better serve all students, in particular students who have disabilities. The bill does require that the State Board of Educator Certification, the SBEC, would propose rules that specify what each educator is expected to know and be able to do regarding the education of students with disabilities, and some training requirements that would be necessary to obtain an educator certificate. Some of those requirements would include ensuring that educators have a basic knowledge of disability categories under the IDEA, and that they understand how those disability categories might affect student learning and development. Similarly, it would require that educators have a basic knowledge of disabilities and conditions that would be considered under Section 504 and how those conditions might impact student learning and development. The bill also required that the educators show competence in certain instructional practices that address barriers to learning for all students, including appropriate accommodations and supports, as well as instructional planning techniques that maintain high levels of achievement and expectations for all students, including our students with disabilities, as well as emergent bilingual students. Additionally, HB 159 ensures that educator candidates can demonstrate competence in the use of evidence-based instructional practices. And that does include the co-teaching, collaborative and co-teaching models that we referenced some guidance on earlier in today's presentation, multi-tiered systems of support, classroom management, and appropriate adaptation strategies. It also includes the use of assistive technology. There's currently no certification for general education teachers who receive serving students who receive special education supports in inclusion settings. One thing to note that we are engaged with Kelly and her team in educator supports around is updating the special education certification process and the aligned certification examinations. There are some proposed changes that have been generated from substantial stakeholder feedback over the last year or so that are scheduled to go before the SBEC as a discussion item. And those are expected to go before the SBEC later this month, actually in September. Additionally, some of that work includes updating the special educator standards for early childhood through 6, as well as 6 through 12. With an emphasis on collaboration and co-teaching supports for all students. There was also a question about how teacher preparation programs are equipping new graduates to take coursework through special education that better prepares them to meet the needs of learners with disabilities when they enter the classroom. So some other pieces here, just to note, following the adoption of HB 159, Chapter 228 of the TAC, the Texas Administrative Code, which specifies requirements for educator prep programs, was rewritten to now include requirements for programs across the state that address HB 159. There's an additional accountability component, which is component 10, and that was added to the agency's continuing approval process for all educator preparation programs. So this means that as programs are audited and reviewed on their continuing approval timeline, they are held accountable for incorporating the requirements of HB 159 into their program curriculum. The addition of component 10 was adopted by the SBEC and went into effect September 1st of this year. There's also some principal certification requirements that came out of HB 159 that emphasize a principal's ability to create inclusive school environments, as well as foster parent and family involvement and curriculum and instruction management for students with disabilities. SBEC has reviewed proposed updates to Chapter 241 of the TAC, which includes the requirements for principal preparation programs and those requirements that are aligned to HB 159. Those haven't yet been approved, but if they are indeed approved, those updates would go into effect in December of this year. So with that, I'm going to shift now to just showcasing a really exciting body of work that my team has been engaged in over the last year and a half, which is this idea of a system-wide inclusion framework. And this is really an opportunity to provide systems-level comprehensive supports to districts and charter schools around inclusive systems for serving kids with disabilities. We can go to the next slide, Dan. So just kind of linking back to where we started today with the data around where students are receiving their education versus how students are actually performing, we know as a state that access to general education alone, simply having a seat in a classroom, does not necessarily result in the progress we need to see for kids with disabilities. You see some examples here of potential current inclusion practices that showcase misaligned systems. So we might have a classroom in a school, or maybe even campus at a district that has done a really great job of unifying great tier 1 instruction, really good SDI practices, and adopted high quality instructional materials. But there's inconsistencies between classrooms, there's inconsistencies across campuses. And so our students with disabilities might experience different educational experiences throughout their journey as they move from school to school or even classroom to classroom. And unfortunately, this doesn't necessarily result in positive outcomes. So what do we need to do about that? So knowing that access to general education alone does not result in what we want to see, we need to ensure we have aligned systems. So what we're working to do through the system-wide inclusionary framework is ensure that we have a mechanism for working with campuses and districts with a focus on districts and charters as the agent of change to ensure that we're unifying these ideas of high quality tier 1 instruction, infusing concepts of specially designed instruction within that, and also considering the adoption of high quality instructional materials that can support those aligned systems as well, thus leading to more positive outcomes for our students with disabilities. So what does this look like in practice? We have a couple high-level objectives here for the system-wide inclusionary framework, and from here forward on the slides, you'll see it referred to as SWIFT, so just another acronym again to add to the acronym dictionary. So the SWIFT is intended to serve as an easy-to-navigate framework, and it's based on best practices for inclusive systems that ensure high-quality supports for students that are consistent across the LEA. That's really the goal here, is ensuring that there's consistency in the way that we serve our students in inclusive settings. And there's certain ways that we'll get to that, and I'll highlight that in a second. It also shifts the focus of our support from sort of individual acts of inclusion, if you will, or focusing on specific classroom or campus-based improvements, to thinking about how can we work with districts, with district leadership as a whole, to make sure that those districts can take high leverage actions that support improved outcomes for students with disabilities across their district. That could be things like master scheduling practices. That could be things like ensuring that co-teaching is structured consistently and educators have access to meaningful professional learning communities. We also have intentionally integrated this work with the not yet completed Effective Districts framework at the Texas Education Agency, so that as districts engage in this global Effective District framework work and they're analyzing their systems, they can use that as a catalyst to launch them into a deeper level look at how they're inclusively serving kids with disabilities and how they might make changes there to actually see improved outcomes for students who do have disabilities. This is an integrated effort that supports systems change. And so I mentioned the Effective Districts framework. We've also done some alignment work with the Effective Schools framework so that this SWIFT work is very connected to ongoing improvement efforts that districts might already be engaged in or might be even required to engage in through the school improvement process. This is also aligned to the differentiated monitoring system for self-assessment, particularly through the LEA self-assessment that is required activity annually. There are approximately, if I'm remembering correctly, 14 entry points through the self-assessment that might be leveraged to lead a district into the system-wide inclusion framework and allow them to create an action plan for success for their district using this framework to guide those goals and activities. In terms of implementation of this work, we are in the process of a smaller scale rollout in the current year and next year in a 2-year pilot. We have allocated staff members to 2 regional service centers, Region 19 in El Paso and Region 20 in San Antonio, to provide a position that we're calling a Strategic Integration Liaison, or SIL, another acronym. And these folks would really be the implementers. These would be the folks working directly with district leadership teams That would include special education directors, but also other folks working in the district like chief academic officers, directors of curriculum and instruction, folks that really need to be at the table when we're thinking about large scale systems change and how we embed these principles of specially designed instruction into systems for supporting students across the district. The SIL, sorry, can you back up? The SIL will do this through ongoing training and professional development. Through the next couple of years, we have aligned the existing ecosystem of special education technical assistance resources and training that's already available across the state to the framework. So those materials can be leveraged very intentionally in working in partnership with districts, but we'll also be surfacing potential gaps where we might need to develop additional materials that would support scaling this out to a statewide level in the next couple of years as well. Now we can go to the next one. Thanks, Dan. The SWIFT would support the district through customized action plan. And so that would start with a needs analysis and diagnostic process that's aligned to this framework. The SIL would guide this work with the LEA leadership team through the needs analysis process and identify those really critical actions that districts would focus on to improve their inclusive systems for kids with disabilities. Using those results, they would create a report that would point them towards certain high priority areas, and I'll say more about that in just a moment, what that actually means. And then through those results, develop a prescriptive action plan in partnership with the district. So they would set goals together and then leverage a process to develop an actionable plan that would bring together TEA statewide resources or potentially ESC resources and professional development for leaders and educators that would enable them to achieve those goals and actualize those outcomes for kids with disabilities. And then after that has been completed, the SIL would facilitate this process, working in partnership very much shoulder to shoulder with districts in year one. And sort of building capacity over time. We see this as a fairly extensive change management process. So the SIL would be very involved in year one. In year two, they would sort of begin to co-facilitate with district leadership. And then in year three, really move towards sustainability of those practices for the long term. So I mentioned high priority areas. So through the research and development over the last year and a half, we've identified 4 of them. And then within these high priority areas, there are additional indicators as well that would really help showcase what does this actually look like in practice. And so those high priority areas are 1, strategic administrative leadership. So what are the actions that leaders need to take to enable inclusive systems and inclusive teaching to occur? Ensuring that districts have an intentional culture around how they serve students with disabilities and how they meet those needs and how educators and leaders go about supporting that. Intentional instructional design that includes principles of SDI, and then high priority for actually implementing that specially designed instruction with fidelity across classrooms, campuses, and across the district. And these high priority areas would be leveraged again through that diagnostic. The prescriptive action plan that the district would use would be focused on likely 1 or more of these areas. There are dependencies built in as well. So if, for example, a need is surfaced through the diagnostic that points to instructional design and SDI, there would be guidance to look to at are there necessary administrative leadership or culture components that need to be also considered as part of that plan in order to achieve that goal around instructional design. And go to the next slide, please. Oh, that's actually the end. So thank you for your time this morning. I know there was a request to share these materials and happy to do that. I'll get this deck over to Stephanie and she can share that out with members. Hope that this time has been helpful and has helped address some of the questions that y'all had from your previous meeting. And again, feel free to reach out should you have any follow-up questions or want to know a little bit more about any of the topics that we touched on today. And Stephanie, I'll turn it back to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jacob. Thanks, Dana. Appreciate your time. That was awesome. Lots of information to share. So I will turn it back over to Jen.
Thank you so much. I'd like to now call Elizabeth Danner to present.
Thank you. First thing before I forget, I'm going to put my contact information in the chat so that you know how to contact me after today if you have questions or connect with me. So I am the state transition coordinator for TEA, and I am now, I think, 1 month in to this role. I'm not sure if Susie May presented in the past to this group, but she was in this role until she left a vacancy by retirement. And so, so that's how I come to meet with you today. I'm in that role. And so prior to being with TEA, I was the transition consultant for Region 13 Education Service Center, or ESC. And we heard earlier, I'm sure most of you are very familiar with your ESCs. Some of you I see are even in an ESC today in the building. So many of you are familiar with that, but Jacob and Dana shared a bit about the, and I saw Stephanie posted into the chat a link to learn more about the ESCs. So, so it's been all things transition in my world for a very long time. And so today, what brings me here today was a request for information about transition planning and data pertaining to post-graduation transition implementation and success. I wrote it down because I wanted to be sure that I shared the information that you're needing, but I also wanted to be really intentional about having an informal review of the tools and resources that are available to you 24/7. And then we can also have, you know, kind of any discussion as well that you need, either clarifying questions or additional information that you were looking for. So so some of this might be a review for some of you, but hopefully we'll get some pieces in there that that this group was specifically looking for. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. And so I'm going to start us out. Let's see if I can find my way back to the chat, because I also want to put in the link to this website. We're starting out with the Texas transition website. And just as Jacob and Dana shared the information about the inclusion in Texas and some of the work of that technical assistance network, this is the Student Centered Transitions Network, is the technical assistance network that focuses on the work of secondary transition, as well as all things early to exit. And you can even see right here in the logo, it's all things kind of getting school ready, all the way to graduation and getting world ready. All of those things that that students with disabilities might need and their families might need to help prepare for post-school success. So, so with that, as you kind of land here, I'm going to start with something that I'm hoping many of you have seen before, and that is the Texas Transition and Employment Guide. This was revised and published last year. This is a state requirement that TEA produce a Texas Transition and Employment Guide, and it has been through several versions, and this is the most recent. And you can see it's available in several languages. A Braille reading file will be published soon. An ASL video version will be published soon. So you can see that a lot of emphasis has been given to helping students and families connect with the information in this guide in the most meaningful way. You also see this interactive video. If you needed to know more about how to use the guide in your work as a professional, that's really what this video is about. It's about specific to using the guide. But we're going to click on, and hopefully, can you see, did the share screen jump into the guide. Okay, I see Stephanie nodding, so thank you. So you can see the PDF of the guide, even though this is intended for a student audience. It's written directly to students, and students don't speak the language of PDF. They probably speak TikTok and other languages, right? So we have there are other ways that students access information on their own. However, this was intended to produce a resource that students can access, or their families, teachers, supporters, anybody who works with students would be able to use this resource to have conversations with them about planning for adult life and transition planning. So you can see here with color coding and graphics, it was really designed to meet a student audience with, certainly a lot of information that can be used by others in students' lives. And you can see it covers a lot of ground in a short space, in a small space. And I want to highlight one thing on this welcome page. The guide really tries to keep student-friendly language, plain language, make sure that it's really accessible to students. It does not bog down in administrative code references and citations and statute. It really tries to avoid that. But for those who want that kind of information, there's the link to sped text and to legal framework. So if you're really wanting to know, well, what is this based on, you do have links to get further information. And so all I want to highlight about this guide today is that transition planning. So in response to the request for information about transition planning, I just wanted to highlight this chapter specifically. So you have a little blurb about transition planning, a little introduction, and then some of the key acronyms used. But really, it's this page that I wanted to highlight. This is a one-page infographic. And you can see that what this covers is all of the key terminology used in transition planning. So if you or someone you know is going to an ARD meeting where transition planning will be discussed, this would be a great go-to resource. This could be for a general educator who is attending an ARD meeting where transition will be discussed, or an agency representative, the people who might not know all of the details of what's being discussed. And what's the difference between a transition assessment and a state assessment, like STAR, things like that, or evaluation to determine eligibility. Those are different things. And so this can be a great one-pager to just kind of get the lingo and to just understand some of those key processes. These are terms that come from statute and both IDEA and state requirements. And so this can be just a helpful way to, if you feel like you know just enough to be dangerous about transition planning, this piece can be really helpful in kind of helping synthesize that information and understand what we're talking about with each of those key terms. And then I'll scroll past the student story. There's one of those for each of the chapters. We'll scroll past the checklist of self-determination skills and the TED. Hopefully, if you have information, if you are working in or with LEAs, so districts or charter schools, and any of your work has to do with transition, or you need more information about transition, connecting with the TED for that LEA would be the thing to do. The TED is the Transition and Employment Services Designee. And it's a bit confusing because you can find that person in something called Ask TED. So there's a one-pager just devoted to finding the TED in Ask TED. And so if you need to do that and you don't get what you need from this page, contact me and I will walk you through how to find the TED in Ask TED. It's kind of a mouthful. Too many TEDs in Texas. So also wanted to highlight for you here in terms of how do we approach transition planning when we're thinking about for an individual student, This page, questions to ask your ARD committee, this can be a really helpful way to just kind of consider the key elements of transition planning as it applies to an individual student. And so each of the chapters has a list at the end of the chapter. It has a list of questions to ask your ARD committee. And some of the chapters also have additional questions, like questions to ask your TVRC, which is the Transition Vocational Rehabilitation Counselor. So some of the chapters end with questions for those adult resources who are going to be available to support in adult life. But this one just focuses on questions to ask your ARD committee. So this can be another great way to think through whether it's considerations for an individual student or family, or if it's if you're thinking about, well, in the paperwork for the district that I'm working with, or in general, where is this found? Where would we look for that? So this can be a helpful resource. So I'll kind of pause here to see if there are any questions on the guide. And
Elizabeth, it's Aaron. I have a question for you.
Sure.
So you said the document, the PDF we were looking at, was designed for students to use, correct?
That's correct.
So has that been put in front of naive students who've never seen it before and at different phases in their transition planning, early and about ready to graduate and maybe in between, and gotten their feedback in some way of can they find information that's useful to them? Do they think it's presented in a way that's effective for them to contribute to their transition planning?
Excellent question, and absolutely critical, right? The students are our most important stakeholders, right? Especially when you're talking about a product for them. So glad you asked, because it gives me the chance to highlight the Regional Student Advisory Committee, or RSAC. Again, going back to why not make up a new acronym, right? So the RSAC has been in place for a few years, and so the RSACs, I guess if we can multiply these committees, are students across Texas, and the Technical Assistance Network, the Student Centered Transitions Networks, supervises this. And what they do is they invite educators to be the link between TEA and the student voice. And so what they do is, and you can see more about it here, and I'll just go ahead and type get the direct link right there into the chat for you to this page, because sometimes I know navigating a website can, be a little tough. It's under About Us. So this page tells you how it works. But there are the real critical piece to this are the educator sponsors, which are teachers. Often it's TEDs, the transition designee for a district, who volunteer to host an RSAC. And so what they do is they identify students with self-determination skills already established. And it's encouraged that these are students who really represent their local district, right? So that it's that we're looking for students who can represent that district or charter school, and also that it's students along the continuum of disability, right? So that we have a lot of different perspectives, and we hear the voice of students with different needs, different goals, different strengths, different perspectives. And so what happens is the agendas are developed, and then the educator sponsors for the RSAC, for each RSAC, they set the time and the place and the location. Some host virtual meetings, some have after school clubs, some have find time during class time, whatever works. It can be, an individual, whatever works for each educator sponsor and their RSAC group. And what goes on the agenda are different topics that TEA needs to hear from students in Texas. And so in this case, the RSAC groups were tapped into twice. Once looking at the previous version of the guide. and asking students to review that and go through and look for specific information, or to think about their own situation and to think, where would you go to find this information in this guide, and what's missing, what else do you want, and what are some questions you have about transition planning. So they were asked to review the previous version, and then once the revised version was published, they were then asked to review that to give their feedback about, would you use this? And certainly we did hear, it's too long, it's too much, it's, I don't look at PDFs, and this is, we would prefer something TikTok, a video. TikTok specifically did come up in RSAC feedback, right? So so they were sharing, like, this is how we get information, this is how our generation gets information and processes information. So so the Technical Assistance Network is exploring avenues for animated student videos and different things. We will not likely hit TikTok, being having state agency restrictions and other parameters. We are still dealing with certain restrictions to to various platforms and things. So
YouTube Shorts, maybe.
Pardon?
YouTube Shorts.
Yeah, we'll get as close as we can get, while still probably, falling short of the trendiest. But we'll try to get some more avenues for students to be able to access. And the other thing is maybe having these animated student videos that can help them just engage with that PDF, right? So certainly, we want it to have all of the accessibility features, but also just, maybe if it's the thing that gets them more interested in it. And we did get feedback that when they first opened it up, they weren't so interested, but as they went through that activity, they were more interested. They did find it more interesting, and they found it interesting to hear, have group discussion about it. So it's sort of like, yeah, it might look like just a PDF, but there's a lot in there that you're really gonna be able to use. So some of it is just getting interest, but it really was essential feedback. They were essential partners in the process of revision. And then it's going to be revised again. There's statute that says this needs to be revised periodically. And so getting their feedback is absolutely essential. So thanks for asking that. It's a great chance to talk about the RSAC, which is just an incredibly helpful group. Get a lot of good feedback about that.
Is there one RSAC and the representatives are from the regions, or does each region have a separate RSAC?
The goal is that there would be representation from each region, and the last couple of years have been a little rocky with COVID closures and just all of the additional demands for educators, certainly, and that came up with teacher recruitment and retention issues. And I know you'll be talking about that a little bit later today. So we also saw that with RSAC, with either educator sponsors. Some had to drop out during the year. They just found that it was just sort of that one more thing that, since it was optional, they had to drop that. So we've had different levels of participation with that. I do know that recently the numbers for this school year are looking fabulous. We have, I think, 16 out of the 20 ESCs have at least one educator sponsor who has volunteered to host RSAC and facilitate RSAC meetings. So that was really good news. What we're hoping for is that we would have representation. Certainly, the goal would be from each region, and at the very least that we would just sort of have, West Texas, South Texas, Central Texas, East Texas, that at least the wider regions of Texas would be represented at the very least. And that has actually been achieved in the past. It's just, we would like to see more and more and more. So, and so there is a goal to increase both numbers of students and then participation by region. So we are certainly attuned to that. because we want to hear from all students across Texas and get those voices. I also wanted to highlight for you the statewide contacts, and I know this was something also that the Inclusion Network shared. You do have on the Texas Transition website, you have contacts. So if you wanted to know more about transition, or you wanted to know more about transition in a certain region, you have the contacts here, along with that map of the ESC regions. The other thing I want to highlight is under training here, you have this link to online professional development. So there's a required training for TEDS, the Transition and Employment Services Designee. And then you also have a little more detailed information, that infographic that I showed on page 4 of the Transition and Employment Guide. There were terms like transition assessments, post-secondary goals. Some of those key terms come up here, coordinated set of activities. And so you have a little additional training opportunities. So if it's something that you wanted to know more about specifically, or you wanted to be able to share more information or where to go for more information, you have that as well. So with that, we are quite proud of this, this new, we get this little pop-up here on the website, and my Zoom tool is not letting me close it out quick enough. But I wanted to kind of shift gears. So that was really my sort of overview of where do I go to learn more at the surface level about transition planning, or if I need a deeper dive into critical elements of transition planning or statute related to transition planning. That kind of covers that piece. There's a lot more on the website, obviously, but I just wanted to touch base about that's where to begin that journey, and where to go for more support. But that the question that I had about that request for what about data for what happens for students with disabilities when they exit, where is our data about that? All of that falls into something called Indicator 14. And to talk about Indicator 14, I'm going to take you over to, and I'll put this into the chat. I'm going to put the link into the chat to the state performance plan indicators. This is a federal requirement for states. It's under IDEA. And so every state addresses the state performance plan or SPP indicators. And so this is the TEA website. And here you can see that the data that is collected and then submitted is about graduation, dropout. We see suspension and expulsion, preschool. This is a lot of information here. And two that are pretty critical to transition planning are, of course, Indicator 13, which looks at evidence of transition planning in the IEP with a sampling of students. And then the other one that I'm going to focus on today is Indicator 14, which has to do with post-school outcomes. So this is really the key indicator for measuring what happens to students when they exit school, after all of that transition planning has been done, after all of those courses have been taken, and inclusion. You know, we heard a lot about inclusion processes. After all of that has happened, what happens to our students who graduated with an IEP in place at the time of graduation? What happens? And so what we're measuring is how many students are enrolled in higher education, and how many are either enrolled in higher education or competitively employed, and how many are enrolled in higher ed or in some other post-secondary education or training. And so you see some more information here about how that's calculated and the different data sources. And so you have the information here on the TEA website. So that is just kind of the big picture view of what is Indicator 14 and how does it tie into the SPP in general, the state performance plan. So with that, I'm going to go back to the Texas Transition website. And so here you see some more information about SPP 14. You get a little more language about that. Again, you see a lot of it reflected from the TEA website. And so what it looks like is 1 year after students graduate, their contact information is pulled from the TSDS, the data system, and Gibson Consulting Group is the contracted group to conduct the survey. And so what they do is they call, email, they send postcards. They try to get in touch with those students who graduated a year prior to say, where are you now? Are you enrolled in any courses or any kind of programs or college? And what does higher education look like? What about employment? And so I'm going to show you I'm going to click over here to state reports. So Gibson is currently the vendor that conducts the survey and produces the reports. In the past, it's been a group called Newstat. And so you can see that the report formatting has changed. So we're going to go over the most recent report, which is, the report is from a year ago, and it reports on students who exited 2 years ago. So we have a lag data. This is the definition of lag data in terms of what we're looking at as students who've graduated in at least a year prior. And in this case, the report we're going to review is for students who graduated in
1920.
In 1920, yes, in 1920. So so when we look at this report, I really just kind of want to highlight this for you, because if this is data that you really want to be able to review and stay on top of, or be able to refresh, know that so this was published in December of 2021. The fall is when to start looking. Later in fall is when to start looking for the latest report, which will have the data for the 2021 cohort who exited a year ago, right? So this summer they conducted the survey, and then they're going to be putting together that report. So with this, I'm going to try to make it just a bit bigger. We are not going to read the entire report together, but I want to highlight some things for you. So they go into the background and context. They talk about what contact information they had, phone numbers and email addresses. So they give you information about the sampling. They also talk about how they describe their efforts in reaching out to these graduates, or the students in that cohort, graduates, dropped out, exited. So they describe their process in conducting the survey in great detail, and then they also talk about response rates. And so you can see what got the best response rates. And it also gives you just more information about how that was, how that looked, what the survey looked like. It also gives you information by student group. And so you can see representation of each group, of each student group. So you can see that. And this is, of course, statewide. And give some definitions of what that looks like. My preferred visual to understand what they mean by category 1 and category 2. You saw that language sort of bulleted out on both the TEA website for SPP and on the Texas Transition website. I like this visual, and I'm going to make it even a bit bigger, because it gives you an idea of, okay, when we say higher education, what do we mean? We mean that we're in at least a 2-year community college or a 4-year college or university and completed at least 1 term. So that's helpful to sort of understand who we're talking about and what we mean by that. What are those definitions? Competitive employment means not meeting category 1, but meeting one of these. So worked a total of 3 months or more, an average of 20 hours a week or more. And paid at least minimum wage, right? So this is important information when you're defining that, that idea of full-time employment is not, there's no one official way of defining it. The IRS has one way of defining it. different accountability systems have different ways of defining it. So just, this is the helpful page that I like to use to really understand, who are we talking about? If we say that a certain percentage of students were competitively employed, what do we mean? That might not necessarily mean 40 hours a week. And so you can see that, and I won't go into more detail about this, but you also see, knowing that and being able to go back to that table that lists what we mean, then that might help make these percentages a bit more clear in terms of what we mean by 24% were enrolled in higher education. Now, the cause for alarm is what is often referred to as graduating to the couch. And what that means is did not meet category 1, 2, or 3, or didn't meet other education, did not meet any of those definitions that we reviewed over here on this table, did not meet any of those. And when I see a number like 35%, I think we can all agree that that was not likely to be the post-secondary goal for 35% of students in Texas, right? So that's the cause for alarm piece is often, that's the first thing that we kind of review, is looking at that. And so I'm going to stop there in terms of reviewing the report. I just wanted you to be able to see how the report is organized and where to find that data. And then I also want to just highlight, so there's again the TEA website, and then our national partners, the National Technical Assistance Center on Transition, the collaborative, NTAC-C for short. They're kind of our transition partners who bring in that national perspective. And so they certainly are focused on, among other things, indicator 14. And I also just want to highlight, now, if you went to transitionta.org, you would get a login notice. So it could be that all that you need for today is just my review of the resources I'm going to share from NTAC-C. If it's something that you really wanted to do a deeper dive into NTAC-C, what the resources available, you would just need to create a free account. So don't be alarmed if you hit that login wall. So I'm logged into my account and I can see the resources, and a lot of these are of course designed for state agencies to promote transition planning and effective post-school planning. That's the focus of a lot of their work. But I wanted to just highlight for you this tree of influence, and I think this somewhat came up in the earlier discussion about inclusion, that it's not just one thing. We're not just talking about one simple thing, in the same way that when we think about post-school outcomes, that's not just the activities from senior year until a year after high school, right? That's everything building up toward adult life. And just notice that from that national perspective, you'll see that a lot of these pieces, this is all of those state performance plan indicators that I'm going to bounce us back. Apologies for clicking around, but sorry, let me get back to the cards. So all of those SPP indicators that I just kind of briefly skimmed past earlier, here they all are. And notice that while this visual is a bit overwhelming, I find it a bit overwhelming. It's just a lot of words and colors and different information. What this tree of influence really does is it just highlights that all of these factors contribute to post-school outcomes. It's not just about a lack of local job opportunities, right? When we look at that graduation to the couch, not involved in other activities, we're not just able to point to a lack of local job opportunities. It's a lot of factors that go into this. And so when we're thinking about post-school outcomes, there's a lot of good data to review, and it's really important to also be considering all those other pieces and how they interrelate all the way from earliest eligibility, right? So looking at things like child find and early childhood special education and into the LRE, that it's really how all of those tie together, that those are part of the greater discussion about post-school outcomes. And so with that, I'm going to stop my share and just see if there are any other questions, but I just really wanted to give you both the most recent and stay tuned for the upcoming report on SPP 14 and also take you all the way to that national perspective. One more thing to watch for on the Texas Transition website is there are going to be some videos posted. There's a series of 3 videos that will review Indicator 14 for administrators, so mostly for school administrators, what it is, how to review the data, and then how to improve post-school outcomes. So that's a watch for. And other than that, that's really all I had for you today. So if there are any questions, I'll keep an eye on the chat, and otherwise I will hand it back. Thanks so much for letting me join today.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Are there further questions at all? All right. There we go. Sorry, had a computer issue. I'd like to now call Julie. I am going to butcher that. I'm not even going to try. Please accept my most respectful. I'm sorry, I'm an idiot.
You're not ever an idiot. Don't be saying that. That's just not allowed.
Nobody ever gets it correct, so don't worry. And I apologize, I have to listen to my voice. That's what happens when you have little kids who come home from daycare with germs. So
yes.
Oh, I wonder how to find my my PowerPoint. And so, hi, good morning, Julie Wayman at TEA, and I'm having a little bit of a hard time pulling up my PowerPoint. I wonder, maybe I ought to, having a little laptop issues here.
Hey, Julie. Hey,
yes.
Julie. It's Stephanie. I'm sorry. We're going to have Julia first.
Oh, good. Then I'm going to send you my PowerPoint. I thought you said Julie. Great. I'm going to send you my PowerPoint.
I'm so sorry. No, we're going to have Julie.
Hi, Julia.
First.
Hello. Sorry for the confusion.
Hey, those J words. Okay.
Julia, it's all the same. Okay, so good morning to everybody. My name is Julia Shockrell, and I'm the Director of Strategic Projects and the Chief of Staff to the Deputy Commissioner of Technology, Melody Parrish. And our team is responsible for the Long Range Plan for Technology. So just to provide some background information, Tech 32.001 requires the State Board of Education to develop a long range plan for technology, and they shall update the plan at least every 5 years. So over the last 3 years since TEA issued the 2018-2023 LRPT, how we think about the role of technology in education has been transformed. The definition and scope of educational technology itself has changed fundamentally. So for this reason, and to honor our commitment to reevaluate and revise and update the plan at least every 5 years as required by statute, TEA reconvened the original 2018-2023 LRPT Advisory Committee, plus a number of additional subject matter experts to evaluate, revise, and add to the 2018 plan to accurately reflect the needs of our local education agencies today. At this most recent SBO meeting on September 2nd, the board approved the public posting of the revised and extended 2018-2025 long range plan for technology. So with that said, the information the committee you guys have is requesting today from us is information about the process for updating TEA's long range plan for technology, including whether or not there was input from stakeholders representing special education and those with knowledge of assistive and accessible technologies. So to address this request, I'd like to introduce a few of our team members. Gabby Rowe, who was the project lead on Operation Connectivity and was the project lead for the revised and extended LRPT, and Jessica Coffey, the lead interview consultant of the LRPT, and they can elaborate on y'all's information requests. So with that, Gabby, Jessica.
Thank you so much, Julia. And we've got just a few slides to give an overview of our approach to the LRP, and then also talk about some of the additional resources that we are providing with the document. If you could move it to, there we go. So I wanted to quickly just give an overview of the full long-range plan for technology. There are 6 overarching goals. Those goals were actually set in the original LRPT that was done several years ago. And we didn't change those overarching goals. What we did change was some of the detailed objectives underneath those to make sure that, as Julia said, they reflected the changes in use of technology over the course of the last several years, particularly focusing on areas like equitable access, using virtual technology and other sophisticated technology tools, which we've already heard a little bit about this morning with the AT, but also to make sure that we continued that thread throughout all of the objectives that were mentioned that are mentioned in this chart. So those 6 objectives are personalized, flexible, and empowered learning, equitable access, digital citizenship, safety and security, collaborative leadership, and reliable infrastructure. Next slide, please. The components of the plan were, of course, the updated document that Julia mentioned that is going to be mounted publicly for access. And then we're launching a series of webinars, first for executive directors in the ESC regions and for their staff. And then after that, a series of either webinars or on-site meetings with LEAs, groups of LEAs, to discuss how they could leverage this document to develop long-range technology plans for their own districts. The third component, though, which I think has some of the richest material in it, particularly as we think about equitable access and special education, is a living and breathing resource center that we have built to support the long-range plan for technology. When we interviewed many of the constituents who had participated in the original plan and those that we added, one of the comments we got back was it's one thing to get a printed book that sits on somebody's desk or even that they can access digitally, but what we really would love to understand is how can we use this to apply to our own districts? And more importantly, how do we identify resources that will help us target particular areas of interest for us around technology? And so that resource guide includes workbooks to develop your long-range plan for technology. It has how-to videos on how to build either as in a classroom, a campus, or a district, how to build a long-range plan for technology for your students and for your constituents. And then it also includes, as I said earlier, those resources that apply to very specific areas where you have interest. Those resources, such as the ones that you saw earlier from the TEA around assistive technology and some of the other more inclusive tools available, are part of that resource center. And also the resource center is built to be an evergreening platform, web-based platform. So as we identify additional resources, or those are brought to us that apply to the areas in the LRPT, they can very easily be added. And so we fully expect that resource center to continue to grow and just create another place that districts have to tie information to their needs as relates to planning for technology in the long run. So, as I said earlier, we do have 6 goals for the long-range plan for technology, but there are 2 in particular where we had very significant conversations about, are we representing at a high level what we expect campuses or districts to include in their long-range plan for technology around equitable access. And the first of those is personalized, flexible, and empowered learning. So how do they build out those spaces to make sure that they are accessible to all? And then one of our strategic goals is equitable access. And that specifically speaks to the importance of the role in technology in meeting learners where they are and providing them with the tools necessary to make the most of their educational experience. Next slide. So that first goal is, as I said, personalized, flexible, and empowered learning. And it really does focus on the spaces, collaborating across disciplines, making sure that all of the tools available are being fully utilized. And then, of course, modeling across your campus, across your district, how those tools can in fact be used for different types of learners to ensure that we are meeting them where they are, and we're developing that personalized approach to learning. Again, it's important to remember that the long-range plan for technology is a very high-level document. It is meant to not call out any specific approach or any specific group, but instead set the standard at a high level for how technology can be used across districts and how the planning for that technology can be put in place. Next slide. So the second strategic goal, equitable access, really does specifically touch on how do we ensure that all different types of learners in all different types of environments, whether they are in school or they're learning virtually, have the ability to take advantage of their education, as we just heard in the presentation before this, be fully equipped to go on to whatever the next level is in a successful and productive way. And technology, as we've heard mentioned already many times this morning, can play a significant role in making sure that that success does in fact happen. Next slide. So specifically focusing on the actions in our equitable access strategic goal, 2 of our 15 members on the committee were specifically tasked with thinking about what needs to be reflected in the long-range plan for technology, specifically for the learning needs of our special education populations, without, as I said, going down into talking about specific groups, because the mandate of the long-range plan for technology is to keep things at a very high level. And we wanted to make sure that the envelope included what was needed for those populations, but again, does not specifically talk about them. That is left to the resource center. So the first is really assessing what it is that those populations need, identifying the tools, and again, making the accommodations with the right types of equipment, the right types of technology, the right types of tools and the training that goes along with those. And Scott Gilhausen from HISD and Agatha Thibodeau both were important participants in making sure that we properly reflected that in the words that we used within the long-range plan for technology. The long-range plan for technology is as comprehensive a document as you can have at a very, very high level. And again, as I said, it creates the envelope in which we can link those resource tools, which will include not only the resources that have already been developed, a number of which we heard about today, but will also include those that are brought to the long-range technology plan for technology group to include in that resource center. Now I open it up for questions for both myself and for Julia that we can ask about the LRPT, as we lovingly call it, yet another acronym.
Ms. Aaron, thanks for that overview of the plan. After all that, I'm still not sure how accessibility and assistive technology are actually addressed there, other than to say the implication there when you say that the goal is to be high level, that seems to suggest that there's a belief that accessibility and assistive technology are for a niche population, not a systematic issue across all these domains.
Well, everything that you see in our strategic goals is intended to be systematic. So it is not intended to be for a niche population, because accessibility, quite frankly, covers a number of different parts of the population, not just the special education population. When I mean high level is that we are not identifying any specific population. We do not identify any specific product. The long range plan for technology is a philosophical strategic goal setting document. It is not a mandate document. It is designed to be a tool to say to campuses and districts, everything that we have in these strategic goals in this document should play a role, should have a part in your long range plan for technology for your campus. How you decide to incorporate that, or the tools you choose to use, we're going to give you a whole lot of resources to help you pick the right ones. There is no mandate that goes with this document. So we obviously have to be very careful not to imply in any way that there is one acceptable way to go forward. But whatever is mentioned in the long range plan for technology, we view as a best practice systematic incorporation across the state.
Can you share how this is communicated? Is this communicated specifically to superintendents of districts? I mean, just for the layman, how is this information communicated to your districts?
Do you want to touch that first, Julia, and talk a little bit how it was done historically, and then I can talk a little bit about what we're envisioning going forward.
So historically, it's publicly posted on the website, and we'd sent out communications pointing LEAs to where they could reference it. Again, it was a little bit used as like a book stop back then. So now we're going to elevate our communications, and I'll let Gabby explain how we're going to spread that going forward.
Yep. So one of the pieces of feedback that we got from across the state was that it would go to a superintendent in a printed copy, and it would end up on the website, but most of the people who needed to use it would never actually see it because it would get stuck somewhere. And so what we will be doing with this version, now that it's been signed off on by the SBOE, is we're first going to be doing it in a introducing it in a webinar to all of the executive directors of the ESC regions, telling them why it's important, and then walking them through the resource center and telling them what's available. We will also be offering them to either do a specific webinar for their region or come to their region to do a presentation on the tools that are available. And then beyond that, we have several tools available, Topia and several other platforms. We're going to be doing bi-monthly sessions with LEAs to meet them where they are in terms of their long range plan development processes, and help them figure out how to leverage this document, which is going to be a little bit more of a bespoke process and a little bit more hands-on. Do you already have a long range plan for technology and you want to update it? Or perhaps you don't have one at all and you want to start. Perhaps you have you want to incorporate something about different types of access or populations in your long range plan for technology that never had it before. And so we will help walk them through where are those resources, how do you access those resources, and support them in that plan development process. Are there any other questions?
This is Aaron again. I have one more question. On the earlier slide, you had a third bullet that said there's going to be a web portal with resources provided, including additional, more detailed materials. Is there, as part of that, guidance on how LEAs, when they are building or procuring technology of any sort, how to either identify whether it meets accessibility standards as part of the procurement process or as part of the building process, what might be some of the standards that LEAs would use to determine if they're meeting their accessibility obligations?
We don't specifically call that out in our goals and objectives, but we have in support of that included materials specifically about accessibility and technology and how to include that into their plans. But again, there is no mandate that goes with this of any specific area that we are supposed to tell somebody that they must do. The best that we can do is point them to what we recommend, and we do recommend that they access those accessibility resources and hold their plan up against them to make sure that they meet the needs in those areas.
Is that a resource that's already up there, or is that in the works?
The Resource Center is actually being put together, and we expect to go live in the next 6 to 8 weeks. And as I said in the presentation, it's an evergreening resource, and this is an amazing group to add to and provide resources to that center as you see them and have them available. We would love to be able to do that. We were, of course, only limited to the people that were working on our committee. There were, as I said, several that were specifically assigned to bring us that material, both of whom were members of this committee. If there are materials we don't have, we want to get as many of them as possible. So please make sure that we get those, and we'll make sure that they are mounted into the Resource Center and that we highlight them in our presentations to the districts.
And I put my contact info into the chat here. So if anybody has any additional suggestions or feedback to add to the Resource Center, we're very much open and would appreciate any suggestions that you guys have. Thank you, Gabby. And thank you, Jen, for letting us present today. Are there any other questions?
Seeing none. Thank you, ladies. We truly appreciate you. As we have now been at this committee meeting for 2 hours, your chair needs a break. Probably so do you. Let's take 10 minutes, and when we come back, let me pull up what I think I know. Julie Wayman, you will be on deck in 10 minutes.
Thank you. See you.
All right, we will reconvene in 10 minutes.
Education department, and now working with Stephanie Wolf and work with all the people, Jacob and the folks that came on the call. And I cannot wait to meet Elizabeth. I haven't met her yet, but the idea was to bring us together more in conversation and to make sure our resources are supporting each other in our schools, so that when we do work together, we are ensuring psychological and physical safety for our students. And of course, our students with disabilities are vulnerable students, and students that we want to make sure are all included in any resources that we develop, that it's relevant to everyone. We are in the general education space, not in the special education space. So of course, students have their IEPs, and the ARD committees decide on student services. My child, of course, when being served through his IEP, received many special related services as well, OT, PT, speech. We had the gamut counseling. And so I respect deeply everything that our partners are doing in the schools. So in our division, we'll be linking and kind of collating and kind of aggregating different resources. Our division director, Hank Weichart, who is a great school administrator, has set up a web page where we'll be linking to all kinds of resources and developing more models and guidance and tools. This is our second division director that we've had. in this year since September of last year. And so we are positioning, however, I've been here for 15 years. So kind of it's nice to be able to sort of be working with new people as well as people that have been here for a while, working across the divisions. One of my big jobs is to do interagency collaboration work and represent TEA and the agency on many councils such as this one, but behavioral health related in particular. That the legislature has stood up, and to develop practices and programs and resources the legislature requires. I will tell you about Project Aware, and I'm going to have Rohana talk about that in just a minute, but we are to develop, and we are developing and piloting different mental health resources and practices and strategies, getting a lot of engagement with many school districts and providing a lot of technical assistance and training to the ESCs and to school districts, and working on that collaboration. We work largely as the EDF gets developed. We'll be working a lot on this level 3 integrated student support. However, pieces and parts of our work will transcend and accompany some of the different levers, but this is primarily where our work will be centered. I'm going kind of fast because I have a lot of slides. I just want to make sure to run through for you guys because you guys are high level advisory council, so you obviously know what's going on. So I want to just give you like a whole download of information so that you have it for when you want it. So in school mental health, just to give you a little context, I did work under Justin Porter back in the day. And when I was working in that was after federal state education policy, when Jean retired, we had Justin working there. We've had a lot of changes, but we had Hurricane Harvey happen. And I worked under Kelly Kravitz in the highly mobile and at-risk division, which is also lives inside of our special populations office. And we were asked to work on mental health by the governor regarding Hurricane Harvey needs that Commissioner Morath and Governor Abbott saw when they traveled out through Hurricane Harvey. And I think that, along with the Santa Fe shooting, were really kind of elevated some of the obvious needs for our state leaders that we needed to address mental health when they heard from school district personnel, administrators, families that they met with. And so we worked and led a 50 agency kind of collaboration around response to Hurricane Harvey. It was during that time when we wrote Project Aware, which is a grant called Advancing Wellness and Resiliency in Education. We wrote that to get some more funding for school mental health, for mental health professionals to go work alongside of teachers and school administrators to help them to be supports when they have extra needs are identified for our students. And so that's what we did. SAMHSA awarded us that grant. Then along came the legislative session in 2019. They added a lot more for mental health and wellness through House Bill 18, House Bill 906, Senate Bill 11, and others. So we started to implement our Project Aware. We started to implement some of the statutes in 2019. The commissioner also appointed a collaborative task force to study and evaluate mental health and mental health needs. I'll talk to you about that just a little bit. In 2020, when the pandemic hit, we developed Project Restore, a trauma-informed, self-guided practice, professional development for teachers. And we began to collaborate to map our school mental health resources. Then SAMHSA, that's the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Administration, the feds asked us to apply again for another round of Project Aware. So they liked what we were doing for the first few years. It's a 5-year grant. And all the money is out to school districts and also contracted with some of our partners at the Health and Human Services Commission and the Texas Institute for Excellence in Mental Health at UT. TEA has been able to have a couple staff, which we're pleased with. Rohana Sykes, who is our director for our Project Aware expansion, the new one we just got. We're hiring a new person. She's an LSSP. Rohana is an LPC. Tammy Genke is coming in October 1st, and I can't wait. She's an LSSP, and she'll be running and doing a lot of sustainability work and running our first Aware project that we're working on right now. And then we have Ashton Millett, who's just a wonderful teacher and coach and policy person. But all of this comes back to, why did the legislature do all of this? Why did they ask TEA to do all of this work? We don't have a funding source for this. So this is more about integrating and understanding across all of our disciplines that our youth, whether they are students with disabilities, whether they are not, is an individual kind of a case. But, you know, you've probably seen the data that 20% of our students are living with some kind of a mental health condition. As a dropout prevention person and recovery, building up a lot of those dropout prevention and recovery programs and institutes and collaboratives back in the early days, I can assure you this is accurate when they report this data, that about 50% of our students age 14 or older with a mental health challenge or mental health illness are dropping out of school. And this issue of 10 years between the delay of an onset of symptoms and then when intervention starts being 8 to 10 years is a problem that we're all working to address across all of our areas. So if anybody has any needs, any co-occurring needs may happen with our students with disabilities as well as all students. We want to be able to have systems set up in our schools to address that. So we look at the data. We've looked at the trends go up over a period of 10 years. As we've tracked it with the CDC, and we know that before the pandemic happened, we were seeing a rise in the students who feel hopeless and sad. For all of us working in mental health, this is a kind of a proxy for depression, and also hopelessness and sadness does not lead toward equitable or positive or successful outcomes for our students. So underneath all of it, when we think of their well-being, we need to think about why students are hopeless and sad, and we need to work on that as we help to engage them in learning and instruction. Our students going up in terms of the percentage who report when we survey our students, which we do in Texas every couple of years. When we have this increased thought of attempting suicide, that's just not sustainable. That's just not what we can have. And so that's one of the reasons we're working on it. Everyone knows that the pandemic has put us into a mental health crisis. The data I showed you on the previous slide was before the pandemic. And so we're getting data in. We know that's increasing. Of course, during the pandemic, just all these emergency room visits that we saw that families were needing to make with their students for these pediatric visits, how it increased just for children, 5 to 11 ages, and 31% for students who were older and teens. This increase in these emergency room visits and this searching for services and supports has been something we've all been contending with. The CDC did do a little bit of data collection, which we're grateful for at the end of last year. And so we do know that 37% clearly experienced poor mental health during COVID. And so that exacerbates on top of what we were seeing back in 2019 when the last data was run and published for our Texas data and national data on our students' mood, mental and behavioral health. And then 44%, so we're seeing like even a 10% increase on those feelings of sadness and hopelessness since we saw it before the pandemic. So these is something we're leaning into. And of course, the parents. I mean, the parents have been, they're calling, they're reaching out. I know they reach out to us a lot here at the agency. They reach out to schools. We try to help schools, but our children's mental health is suffering. And we listen to our students through student voice in many ways. Rahana and I kind of show, we partner with Texas Health and Human Services Commission has a system of care project and a student art contest where thousands of teachers in our state now participate to submit student art for mental health, why mental health matters to me. And so here's an example of a second grade winner in a sea of sadness, how the student was perceiving their world and searching with those words happy written on some of the students to be able to kind of realize that there's some hope for that student. And this concept of anxiety, if any of you have had anxiety is a very debilitating kind of an illness. It can sneak up and really catch our students by hold our students. I've got seniors, we've got all kinds of kids who are really struggling with anxiety, and we have to know that that's real. And it can hold students back from their college and career and readiness goals if we are able to work with our families and students to help our students get some coping strategies and work through some of this. Our COVID plan for the state identified 2 of the biggest learning issues that were happening. We have strengths. We did so many great things as a state with our Operation Connectivity, our launching of all of the new high quality curriculum, tailored to virtual hybrid settings. We did note, of course, the learning loss, which we are so thrilled that that's beginning to have the uptick we were seeking, and also the mental health challenges. So those 2 things being our greatest need, that was in our plan to the Department of Education so that our schools could be able to use some of their ESSER funding as they saw fit with their needs to help them with their mental health challenges. We look at staffing for mental health in the agency is one of the things I do. This is one of my presentations that I give to the legislative committees around this, because we're trying to track and understand. They want to track and understand what does it look like? Do we have enough people out there supporting our educators and our students and our families? And so the kind of the buckets of the kind of professional mental health positions that they look at have to do with the certified school counselors, the school psychologists, the social workers. And we also look at, a deeper, we can break it out and look at clinical social workers, LPCs, and licensed in marriage and family therapists. We can look at other things as well. But as you can see, the trends that, we've been tracking over the years are trending up. So that's positive. But we got a lot further to go if the schools want to address the mental health and wellness through employment. However, mental health and employment is not the only ways schools can address mental health and wellness. And we're going to talk about that just a little bit more in a second. We also track our counselor FTEs and the additional support FTEs. We see them going up, which we're really, really grateful for. We do see our new counselor certificates going down. So that is a concern to us around recruitment and retention of our counselors. Also with the admissions to the counselor prep programs having decreased slightly recently. So that's something that we're looking at and tracking. We do want to show just maybe a few of the partnerships that we do have at the agency that also can support schools with their mental health and wellness. In addition, if you don't have all the FTEs for those professional positions that you might want to supplement your teams in your schools, we do have communities and schools that we operate here at the agency. So when you think about that, they're serving more and more schools all the time, 1,200 schools served in 2020. So that adds additional social workers and counselors and so forth to feeding patterns of, different feeder patterns of school districts as well as individual schools. This is the telemental health. I hope that you've all heard about this, the TCHAT program, Texas Child Access through Telemedicine Partnerships. We are building this. We're in hundreds of schools now. They are in hundreds of schools for free. This is a free service that the legislature funded. Every school is able to have a telemedicine anchor right there in their building. This is a partnership with 12 institutes of higher education, the medical schools across the state and hospitals that they're connected to. And they are hiring clinical, they have psychiatrists leading, they've got clinical social workers, LPCs, and others working with them, psychologists. And they're able to see a student and a family typically within 2 weeks remotely through virtual here, which a child and a family can hardly see a child psychiatrist within 2 weeks in our state if it's not embedded. Think about our small and rural districts, think about the need. So we're getting great feedback from our schools that are engaged with this. Typically you'll see like a counselor be able to coordinate this for a student and a family to get the parent consent and interest to be able to consult. They can see this team through telemedicine for 5 to 6 appointments. And then in the background, they're also working with the school and with us to link that family up with other service providers in the community. So this is like new. This is like Texas is doing better than any other state in the country. This also links up with pediatricians for integrated care in the communities, so that families, when you take your student to their pediatrician, they are also able to access the telemedicine, so that if that pediatrician in a little small community can't get a hold of a psychiatrist that they might want to consult with, or a licensed clinical social worker or others, they can also access through the telemedicine network that's being set up. So this is just a pretty game changer of a situation for what we have out there to support families. Another thing the legislature did, just to let you all know, is they placed licensed mental health professionals into every education school service center, to support the schools. And these licensed people are hired by our local mental health providers, and every community has one. And now they sit inside of our ESCs and they collaborate with our counselors. Every ESC has someone who's dedicated to kind of lead on counseling and mental health work. And they provide training and mental health first aid, trauma-informed care, a lot more. And they can help school districts problem solve when they're seeking an intervention, a service, or a support. So this is just another really nice resource. Here at TEA, we've been asked to build a capacity through our mental health and wellness team. So Rahana and I, who you'll meet in a second, we work with a lot of different interagency committees, and we thought you might appreciate knowing that as you have such an important role with special education. There are several councils out there, and serving students with disabilities also are represented in these areas. It's pretty amazing. We've got all kinds of different conferences and trainings we do. For example, I'm working with Deanna Clements right now out of the special education department around presenting at a conference for our collaborative task force on school mental health and on our judicial commission for mental health as well, which is judges and lawyers and all kinds of important people around the state. This is foundational in statute. I wanted to make sure that you all knew these school mental health components in our Texas Education Code kind of lay a framework. Every school district has to develop policies, procedures, and practices on every one of these topics. They can bundle these. Some of these get deeper and wider. For example, obviously in our suicide prevention and intervention and post-intervention work, that involves some suicide prevention training, some crisis planning, some making sure that you understand your referral pathway, how we're going to be addressing our suicides and intervening, how are we going to handle with trauma-informed lens, any post-vention, prevent any suicide contagion, work with our families, work with our youth, make sure that we are providing appropriate early mental health promotion and intervention, helps with that to begin with. Then we layer on some grief and trauma-informed practices. And we're all driving toward that positive, safe, and supportive school climate. We do a lot of work, and we work collaboratively with the divisions on some curriculum, some materials, some best practice programs around skill building for managing our emotions, and also maintaining those positive relationships. And positive youth development is important for all of our students with disabilities. Back in the day, a long time ago, when I was running community ed and 21st century community centers and in a little urban rural school district, for example, I mean, our students with disabilities loved our after school programs. We also brought mental health therapy in and all kinds of things into those after school programs. There's a lot you can do as a district with the way you weave in mental health support along a continuum of prevention through intervention and work with families all through that. To that end, we have a statewide plan for student mental health that you can look up online. We have the link there. And that kind of lays out where we started in 2020. Started this before the pandemic, of course, and then the commissioner, this is what was submitted to the legislature. We got an update on our progress and next steps in going to the legislature any day now with government relations. Justin kind of mentioned early at the beginning of this day, senior leadership here at the agency is working on a lot of things, a lot of school safety, a lot's going on. So we're all being patient with all of our reports getting through. But if you're interested, you can read a little bit more about what we're doing here. And then the report to the right, that is the Statutory Collaborative Task Force for School Mental Health Services. That's a multidisciplinary superintendents, counselors, parents, agencies out there. All kinds of people are on there studying and evaluating our needs and school mental health. One thing we've learned, we will just say that nothing can get done well. It doesn't matter what kind of program guidance you put out there. It doesn't matter what kind of curriculum you're using. If we're not building good, strong relationships for interagency collaboration and internal collaboration, and that is important in building learning communities as well. So we're real big on collaboration and partnership building in our division, and that's pretty foundational to all of our work. And to that end, we've set up a professional learning community with the ESCs. We do have trauma-informed practices training. They're all equipped as trainers for all of that. They can lead trauma-sensitive schools with consultation. We have a Title IV-A grant where we've piloted with over 100 small and rural districts, a lot of practices, and we have training and coaching and support and implementation happening. But we have plans to keep ramping that up because, like I said, it's always the beginning, but we have a high value on continuous improvement. A lot of the mental health folks really see this school mental health as systems of prevention and promotion of mental health, systems on the tier 1, systems of early intervention on tier 2. Do we have people to link our students with? Do we have those supports in the mental health domain? And do we have treatment for those families who need deeper help? Have we identified those partners and our wraparound services? So in a mental health lens, you're really seeing, like we all do, but also you're seeing the child as a whole child, a whole brain child, a whole child in child development and learning. We look at that across the tier as well. I work really a lot with Diana and the whole tier framework. And so to make sure our terms, our resources are aligned, and this is an important piece to us. So I think of it as no wrong door. You're still going to get the content, you're going to get the resources. And so our Texas School Mental Health Framework, developed with our ESCs and our partners in our schools, was launched just to kind of articulate in a simple visual way what we see as very important in the literature, working with the Department of Ed and with the National Center for School Mental Health, and making sure all those clouds that have to be integrated with policies and procedures out of statute are brought into that MTSS, and that our policies, our practices, our PD, our staff wellness activities, our mental health literacy that we teach to our teachers, our family and community engagement work all helps to support that. And so leading on the pathway to get there, we really value teaming and planning, resource mapping, just making sure we know our needs really clearly, identifying early and doing screening, and that mental health promotion and prevention work. And we work with curriculum on that as well. And our early intervention and access to those specialized sources. So that's those services in the community as well. And we do a lot of consultation on funding and sustainability and measuring practice and our progress and impact of these programs that we do. This is our website, and we're going to show this to you in a minute when Rohana is going to talk to you about Project Aware, but like all of these organizations are who we've partnered with to develop a school mental health practice guide and toolkit that we might want to make sure that you see, because this was the beginning of TEA along with our mental health state plan, just kind of voicing the importance of school mental health practices and integrating it into what we do. So I think some of you might enjoy going through that toolkit. And we're kind of using that to build out additional resources and tools as well. And we also have modules that are getting ready to come, about 10 modules on the mental health side in particular, that we are promoting within our professional development is ongoing. So we are going to have some self-serve along with some curriculum guides and things that'll go through 10 modules about how you can support a school through the mental health lens. And then we work with all these different external partners to do that. And then on the website, you'll see all kinds of information in these different topical areas. For partners, you'll see the school mental health legislation, you'll see all our reports, and you'll see some resources that we've aggregated for families, students, educators, counselors, partners, and more, some COVID resources. And then the toolkit. And our toolkit you can download off the website and just have that as a PDF. All of our school counselors just love it and keep it right there for a resource guide as they're building out all of their guidance and counseling supports and lessons, and working with their interdisciplinary teams as well. And this is just kind of how our steps, our pathway looks, and it totally aligns very, very nicely to everything that's being taught. Also in our MTSS and tier. And so we really love it. And we bring in the mental health concepts and words and strengthen, and then we share resources and links back and forth that we think that will be really strong as we continue to build it out. On our website, you can filter and draw down different resources, community resources, statewide resources. I've got one here that you guys might like that we developed during COVID that has every hotline, warm line, 211 line, everything you want in the state. We always encourage people to download it and keep it on their desktop, because you never know when you have a family, a neighbor, or somebody else that needs something that you can connect them to. In fact, that happened to me just not too long ago. And I always love to be able to have those phone numbers right there where I'm not having to look them up. But there's lots of things on here, and it's a new website that we built with our partners built with us, with our Aware funding, because that's what we use to kind of help give us our foundation underneath of us. We're really big on trauma-informed schools, and all of our teams need to keep students in the center. I mean, this hopefully these values all, resonate with you as well. That's the way we teach, and that's the way we train, and that's the way our resources go out. How do we get started? We, and we work through the training that we do, and as well as what the tier training does to make sure it's aligned, that we have people teaming and working together to plan their supports services on their campuses for our students. And it's not easy. Commissioner says when he talks to the legislature, this is not easy. This is a lot of people. This is a lot of work. Johnny may need something different when he gets referred to a student support team than Sarah needs. And obviously you all know that because special education leads the way, and it always has, in individualizing for students. So this is just another angle of that individualization that we do. We use the ISF and the PBIS resources in our work that we've been piloting with Project Aware. So we've been piloting these frameworks, integrating mental health and PBIS. And that's been awesome. We also use the Center for School Mental Health. How do you develop a school mental health system, SHAPE system? And we've got hundreds of schools that have used that to help them guide and think it through. We have tools, and I'm going to scan through this. I'm going to give each of these things only 2 seconds. It's important to make sure you give templates and things to schools, says our division. And so we're going to be developing a lot more templates and things for schools to be able to use. They love when they get needs assessment tools. They love when they get compilations like this of school climate surveys that are out there and they can evaluate for what works for them. When they can get a screener tool, and we pilot it through Project Aware, where they see, and a superintendent says, oh my gosh, my teachers can do that in 15 minutes and how helpful that is. And then the school works out a referral pathway for what do we do after we identify the needs of those kids. And so then we, in Project Aware, develop a comprehensive service plan. This is what we call it. It can be called anything, but this is where we really are aggregating our school district needs and what we have now, and then what partnerships we need to build, and what other groups can we build and bring in or establish, what other services for our families and kids, how do we engage our families and kids. So we develop these plans and have our teams map them out together. So it's really clear what's being implemented and offered in our school on the support side across the tiers. And so this is just an example of one of our school districts' service plans. They have data collection tools so that they can help monitor what they're doing. And we really love this. We get up on the whiteboards, virtually or real, and definitely map out and draw out those referral pathways. How does a student get from here to there when they have their needs? And so every kind of school team draws that out regarding the mental health piece that they do. And we work a lot on developing memorandums of understandings with local community mental health providers, mental health authorities, TCHAT, it could be anyone, family services organizations, communities and schools programs, lots of people. So we do work on how to develop an MOU and provide samples. We make sure there's sample behavior and referral checklists and observation, all kinds of them that some of our schools use. We've aggregated some, but the teachers know what to look for after they've had mental health first aid training and how to make a referral to the student support team or whatever they're calling it. It doesn't really matter to us what they call it. And we make sure we have informed consent for our parents whenever their students are getting something extra. So there are many students with disabilities, for example, that may be getting something through their IEP, but the parent wants them to have something extra as well that might be available to all students in the school. And so those parents are engaged, obviously, as well. For example, the TCHAT program. And then all of our students that we work with, we want to make sure they all have a wellness plan. And so, you guys who work in special education know the IEP, it's definitely not as dense as an IEP, but we are establishing goals. And our practitioners, our licensed professional counselors that we put in schools with our grants and programs are definitely using evidence-based practices and making sure that they have a plan and goals and measurement for all of our students. I want you guys just to get to meet. How much time do I have left, Stephanie?
Sorry, I was on mute. Well, how much more time do you need? That's really a question for Jen, not for me, because she's the chair.
Oh, okay. Did I do 30 minutes already? I forgot to look at my clock.
Yes, and
okay.
Unfortunately, we have one more. Stephanie, am I correct that we have one more TEA presentation?
She actually had to go to another meeting, so she said that she'd be happy to come back in October.
Perfect.
Okay.
Unfortunately, Julie, we do need to cut you off because this committee has some very important work that we need to address specific to our legislative report.
I think that's great. And that's kind of what my mind was sensing. Like, I think our time is, I've got Rohana here. Rohana, are you on camera? I do want to say, I want you to meet Rohana Sykes. She's an LPC, works here at TEA. She's running Project Aware. And so what I got are a lot more slides. And I was thinking maybe another time we can come back and let you know some more lessons learned from Project Aware and our work collaboration with our special education departments that we're doing there. And y'all might be interested in that. But we put too much in this one deck. Julie did, not Rana. And Jen, if you'd like me to come back at another time and have us tell you a little bit more about what's going on, we'd be happy to do that.
We do have another meeting coming up in October, on October 19th. We'd be happy to have you come back and present that.
Fantastic.
Works out perfect. You guys have a great rest of the meeting.
In the database in the chat, so you can have access to those resources now.
Thank you for dropping the links to the database where all resources are aggregated for you. Thank you. Bye. Have a great meeting.
Hey, Jen, this is Shamika. What was the last topic that they were going to present on? Was it teacher preparation?
Hang on, I've got it. I want to say, here we go. Teacher vacancy and task force updates.
Okay.
And it was going to be, help me out, Stephanie, Kyla, how do I pronounce?
I can't say her last name either. So
Okay, Kyla Jaramillo. I'm going to give that a shot. It's Jaramillo.
yeah, and she's new to TEA. She's been on board maybe a month. She's the director of teacher perspectives and staffing. So unfortunately, she had to jump off. But she's happy to come back in October.
Let's make that a priority, please.
Yes.
We'll put her after Justin. No problem.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Sure.
And Jen, let me ask right now, how many, I know there's some other people on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. What is the number for quorum?
We need 10. I think we've got it.
Yeah, well, because I have to leave. So
okay.
I have another meeting.
All
so
right.
1, 2,
Then
3,
like
4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I was checking to make sure you guys had 10 before I had to go. Because I have to go to a virtual art meeting. So
gotcha. Okay.
So I really wanted to, I was hoping to get to the teacher part because I just had a big discussion with parents about, lack of teachers in the classroom and paraprofessionals who are being hired just basically off the street who have no training when we're talking about all of that with inclusion, that the first presentation. So I have I've had it for 4 or 5 years since I've been on the committee about how paraprofessionals are not trained and retrained and have to do anything. And we've won the battle of students being in their least restrictive environment of, general education, but it's who is working with them that is the issue now.
Right.
So
I get that. Shamika, if you could do this committee a huge favor, I am certain that what you have is a wealth of information that would be important to our legislative report. Could you type up something brief? Or
it's the same thing I've said for 5 years.
Okay.
I've been saying it for 5 years.
Okay.
It's just worse now that there's a teacher shortage of COVID and they are literally just hiring. I had a talk with parents last night in a parent group I do every third Tuesday. They are literally just hiring people off the street that, depending on your level of college, your educational aid 1, 2, or 3. There's no requirements for renewing. There's no continuing education required. So they have no training in disabilities, trauma-informed care, positive behavior supports. They're literally, and I understand there's a shortage. I understand that. But what, as when the presenter said, just having the student in the classroom is not inclusion. It's not effectively working on them in their specially designed instruction and access to general education curriculum. I had a mom tell me they literally got a guy 2 weeks ago in her son's class. He knows nothing really about reading or math. we have got to do something about this. This is.
Yeah.
This is just, it's unacceptable. I mean, the battle was to keep kids in their LRE, which is general ed setting. Now the battle is to, one, keep teachers, but if we're gonna have all this inclusion support, so now I'm asking my parents, are your inclusion support asked if it's being done by a certified teacher or paraprofessional, and if they have been trained, and if they have not been trained, to get training outside the district at a regional service center, at their local regional service center, because it's turning too much into babysitting. And then especially for students who have behavioral issues, sometimes those paraprofessionals do not know how to deal with those issues. So
Okay.
I've
Yeah.
said it up, it's been in the report since I was chair, co-chair, I've written it up, and it's been in there
Okay.
every year.
All right.
So
Then that is something that we will work to strengthen language on at our October meeting. So we
Yeah.
can get that.
I'll
Ladies and
put-
gentlemen, I have notification here from Susan that she will also need to leave at 12:30.
Okay.
Here's what I propose at this point, because we will certainly lose quorum.
Mhm.
As we all have seen, Agatha is unfortunately unable to be with us today. She had a family emergency. Please, let's keep her and her fam in our thoughts. However, that does put me at a small disadvantage because I am chairing and taking notes and keeping minutes. I know that it is the tradition of this committee to present minutes at the end of the meeting for vote. I can't make that happen today, y'all.
Oh, I understand.
If I could propose a motion that we would suspend that tradition and present minutes at the beginning of our next meeting. That is my proposal. Are we, I know that we don't have to have a formal vote on that, but are we cool with that? Because I can't make this happen and I want to be respectful of our time. Seeing a whole bunch of heads nodding, we're cool. Guess what? We're going to present those minutes at the beginning of next meeting.
Oh.
Really quickly, Stephanie, do we have anyone from the public who has signed in?
So guys, I have to go. I will see you October 19th.
Perfect. Looking forward to it, Shamika. I promise to be better organized and,
Oh,
you know.
you're fine. Thank you.
Alrighty.
Bye-bye.
No, not to my knowledge. No, I don't see any. No.
Okay. Then with that, a couple of quick announcements. If you are a member of a subcommittee, I would strongly advise that any further comments, concerns, questions that you can formulate in the next month or 3 weeks rather, be sent to Stephanie and then disseminated to the rest of the committee so that we avoid any walking quorums. Do so. It is my intention at our next meeting to present a working document so that we can put this legislative report to bed before the holidays. I'm not playing around, kids. None of us want to be working on this in November, me especially. So let us, if you know of any committee members who were not present today and you have access to them, Stephanie, I'm going to ask you to please put forward an email in the next week that we can get an RSVP so that I have an accurate count, because it is unfair to the members of this committee if we don't know who's not coming, because we're at crunch time now, kids. I would strongly recommend, and I'm going to have an email to Stephanie by the end of this week to be sent out under my name, encouraging members to make sure that they are present so that we can make this thing happen. We have one job here. This is the one job. Let's be respectful. And I know I'm preaching to the choir for those of us who actually showed up and made the effort today, but let's take whatever indignation we have and go forward it to the other people who did not communicate to us that they were unable to be here today. With that, we have lost quorum. So I, as chair, will call an end to this meeting. I look forward to seeing your bright, smiling, shining faces on October 19th, ready, willing, and able to work. Have a great day.